Since 2009, Reverie Language Technologies has made tremendous strides in bridging the language divide in the digital world by delivering static and dynamic content in multiple languages in real time. Now, Reverie is tapping into the chatbot market in an attempt to boost voice-led social commerce activations and foray into conversation AI for contact center automation. They've partnered with companies like Boonbox, an exclusive rural assisted commerce platform to cater to the Bharat market, where citizens are being addressed by digital first initiatives, especially through the BFSI, e-tail, e-commerce, and D2C businesses. So, in an exclusive interview with Analytics India magazine, Vivekananda Pani, co-founder and CTO, Reverie Language Technologies, and Ramanathan, CEO, Boonbox, tell us how they will build multilingual bots from the ground up in the Indian languages, unlike the norm of training the engine first in English.
So chatbots, yes, chatbots actually have been existing for a while. It's now that they are becoming, one of the mainstream, I would say, interface on the digital medium, where most of the websites or services, they would like to engage with their users on an automated chat, and that's where the bot comes into picture. Now, when it comes to multilingual, it becomes a little difficult because Indian users are not yet that familiar in typing. So they don't find it very easy to type in Indian languages. And there are different reasons to that. I'm not going into the reasons very deep. But let's say quickly, if we look at it, most of the users are looking at an English keyboard to begin with. And when they are looking at an English keyboard and they have to type in native languages, it doesn't come very naturally to all. And people often tend to type in local languages using English language, right? So you see phonetic English and so on. And that's a very non-standard way of writing, because you can have multiple spellings for the same word because people type differently for the same things. And computer ends up having a lot of difficulty disambiguating between what is being said, whether it was English or whether it was native language. And if it was native language, what those words were and what could it mean and so on. So implementing the bot framework over this kind of a difficulty becomes a lot more challenging when it comes to multilingual. That is where, voice bridges this gap big time. So I would say that, although chat is a silent medium and therefore many people would probably prefer chat bot in certain cases. But, in Indian languages, if you are offering a bot, then voice bridges this gap of not being able to type, but you can speak. And when you're speaking, the computer tends to convert that into text, and that is done more or less through an automated system, which does it consistently. So there are no such spell gaps and so on. And then the interpretation becomes much easier. I think that's one of the big reasons why the voice bots in Indian languages are actually becoming much bigger than, how chatbots took off for English. Most of the chatbots or voice bots, when we are looking at becoming multilingual, there is the easiest approach is to amalgamate technologies, like we build, like we create fast food, right? So you can assemble things to be able to create a thing, but not make something ground up that is very original. So one of those is that use machine translation. You have an English voice bot, use machine translation to translate the non-English communication from a user into English. And now you have an English bot, so therefore let the bot handle the English communication. And then, take a response back to again machine translate that and give a response back to the user. Or if it was an action, then follow the action. Now that is one way. The other is that actually have the bot trained and understand the language that the user is speaking. And pieces of that I explained when I was trying to explain about how we train our bots. I would say that that may be one area where we have been unique, or at least I haven't been able to come across other bots that are training in native languages. Most of the bots, they are using these APIs of interconversion to be able to do that.
Right.
Now, there is a fundamental issue when you try to do that technically. When you are using machine translations are also based on a certain kind of corpus over which they are trained.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that particular corpus would become its boundary and limitation in terms of what it can interpret, how it can translate, which would also mean that there would be a degree of contextual loss that cannot be corrected. And moreover, let us say a particular sentence may have a contextual difference in meaning. Then the alternate meanings will also not appear. Whereas, so all of these things will end up posing challenges that just will become impossible to solve because of this architecture. I mean, the way you have integrated and created a solution, that itself will become the limitation in solving certain challenges. Whereas when you do a native training, then the training becomes much more efficient, faster to respond, because there are lesser layers, there are no interconversions that are happening. There is direct interpretation and direct training over which the system is responding. And it becomes a lot more flexible and quick to uptune for any particular kind of use case or new domain and so on. So which is why, Reverie's NLU and bot solutions are among the most efficient available today for any of the languages that we are serving. Let's say when you look at English first training, right? If you have to create a service, the first thing that comes to mind is to create it for English, because a lot of resources, tools, and technologies, everything is available handy. So one would create all of that, and the English solutions are also more mature. So you can create and roll it out, and you are already ready to cater to a large English user base. And then when you try to add other languages, then you already have a secondary look towards those. So it's all about adding a language to your existing solution. So then it becomes a feature. It doesn't become your priority or a primary focus. So it becomes a feature that you want to add.
Yes.
And that is probably a reason why people tend to add fast food kind of an integration by having interconversion layers, which makes it less efficient as well as slower and so on and so forth. But the bigger problem here is that when we do that, we create a more efficient solution for English, right, and we create a less efficient solution in other languages. Probably with the thought that now we have all these languages supported, and at the same time, we might also be thinking that we will observe how the native language users are using. And if they do use more, only then we will try and focus more on there. Otherwise, let us not invest on that anymore. Now, the problem out there is that by creating this kind of a solution, we make the experience for a non-English user poorer. Mm-hmm. When you have an experience that is poorer, it will naturally have less usage and more dropouts. Mm-hmm. And that itself will skew for us the data that we had been looking for. We wanted to look for, how the people are using, so that we will see if we want to focus more on there. The fact is that when we don't focus on user experience right at the start, then the users they end up forming an impression that it doesn't work for my language. I have to learn to be able to use it in English, or otherwise not use it at all, right? So that is the kind of thing that basically keeps people away from using a lot of these solutions, or basically trusting a digital solution in native languages. When you look at how enterprises have tried to look at languages more recently, it would be eye-opening for the industry that the consistent finding has been that it is the native first and complete user experience in local language that gives a complete edge to our business. So in this Building for Bharat videos, Arvind, and so he basically spoke to several enterprises like Bajaj Alliance and many others, and they have the ones who have implemented local languages, native languages, and they have all emphasized that English first or English extending to other languages are not the way that things have ever worked for them. So it has been that the native and ground up local language and complete experience has given a massive edge to the usage. The most natural way of somebody speaking to, let's say, whether it's a bot or a person, when you are speaking to a, let's say, a customer care, then many times we have seen that a question is posed whether you would like to speak in English, Hindi, right, Marathi, whatever, right, what your language, and people would make a choice, but they would end up speaking in a different language. And I myself have done that many times. I would select English and end up speaking in Hindi, and so on, right, vice versa. It can happen. So that is the kind of naturalness people would end up expecting even from a bot. And that's where it becomes more challenging, because humans have the ability to disambiguate languages very easily, what they know, what they don't, right? But for computers, it is not that obvious. They require special training, and then you need to either explicitly select a language and then stick to it, or continuously try to implement language identification modules to be able to understand what the user is speaking, right? So whether the user is speaking Hindi or in English or a different language, and then invoke the right kind of interpreter and so on. So yes, those kind of challenges are actually would be considered among the major challenges. I know that there are a bunch of technologies that we have to use to be able to create enough fluidity in the way of the voice conversations are supposed to be handled. See, the challenges usually are looked at from two angles. One is educate the user. The other is make the technology smarter. Now, educate the user is actually the most preferred way, because if the user gets educated, then the accuracy and the I would say the reliability of the whole system is much better. But beyond a point, educating users is also very difficult, because you don't have direct access to users to be able to tell them, and sometimes the users may not be interested or that keen to be able to learn. And therefore, bridging that expectation becomes a very big challenge. So we try and bridge as much as is possible by making technology smarter. And in trying to do so, like I mentioned, we have got layers of tech that co-work with each other. For example, trying to constantly modulate and understand what language the user is speaking in. It sometimes can work, sometimes it can still get stuck. And then when you are still trying to implement the understanding of that, there you have, I know that there are a bunch of technologies that we have to use to be able to create enough fluidity in the way of the voice conversations are supposed to be handled. See, the challenges usually are looked at from two angles. One is educate the user. The other is make the technology smarter. Now, educate the user is actually the most preferred way, because if the user gets educated, then the accuracy and the I would say the reliability of the whole system is much better. But beyond a point, educating users is also very difficult. Because you don't have direct access to users to be able to tell them, and sometimes the users may not be interested or that keen to be able to learn, and therefore bridging that expectation becomes a very big challenge. So we try and bridge as much as is possible by making technology smarter. And in trying to do so, like I mentioned, we have got layers of tech that co-work with each other. For example, trying to constantly modulate and understand what language the user is speaking in. It sometimes can work, sometimes it can still get stuck. And then when you are still trying to implement the understanding of that, there you have to interpret not just a purist language model. For example, let's say if you have selected the language Tamil, and in the midst of Tamil, you might end up speaking in English, right? Because there are certain things that you are comfortable speaking in English. So if you mixed languages, then the system must be able to understand that. If you haven't trained your system for that, it'll get stuck. So we try and do most of these to be able to cater. Now, that is where a lot of that low resource. There isn't enough user data that is there to be able to understand how users will behave, and what kind of a training and solution you must create. So you would create a lot of this by doing some amount of research with users and so on. But the real leap in usability increases when you have real users using your solutions. And in that, we partner with a bunch of solution. I would say some of our customers and some of our solution partners. We work with them to be able to do that. We are working with some of our customers as well as solution and tech partners to be able to do solution fine tuning on the field. And one such partner is Boonbox. Boonbox is an e-commerce company that provides delivery in rural areas, rural India, even to areas where there are no pin codes. And in those areas, mostly people do prefer speaking in the native languages. And so that's when we end up discovering, how people speak, what they speak, and so on. So they have used us, and we have taken WhatsApp voice bot to their users right now. We have been looking at new professions and new ways of delivering content to users. In fact, although internet started in text mostly because of bandwidth issues probably in the initial days, the growth of video in India has been phenomenal. And that has been right from the start, which has also led to the fact that, if out of India today, more than half the usage or consumption of internet is probably video. And with the new education policy, where there is emphasis of education also in local Indian languages, there is a large amount of education content that has been created in English, also being emphasized to be created in non-English Indian languages. So video, not just for entertainment, but as a major source of information, has become big in India. Therefore, video localization itself is an area that has become phenomenally big. And we started working on video localization pretty early. And we came up with a product that nearly automates every piece of the steps in video localization, enhancing about 80% faster video localization as against manual ways of doing it. So that makes it a very unique tool where, let's say you have a lecture in English, you will be able to convert that with subtitling and translations in different languages. and a final video that has the speaker speaking in a different language. So all of that getting done through an automated workflow. Whether it's at the end or right from the start, we have a mission, right? We want to bridge the language divide on the internet, and we want to touch almost all Indians in that. So this goal is pretty large, and I think it will actually be an ongoing activity. I'm not really looking at an end goal, but let's say if you were to ask me, how should that look like? Today, when you look at internet, you don't really think non-English in the first place. And for every non-English internet user, it is still an alien area. They still consider that, okay, I'll have to try. Whereas if you are using the internet in English language or English language internet users, they are confident about it, right? So there is enough that has been facilitated in terms of technology availability and access, right? So I would say that when a user of any language is able to use the digital medium without really having to bother about what language and what is available, what is not, then I would say that we have sort of reached there, and it's a pretty long ride, and anyway we are striving towards that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Indian language standards have been neglected big time, and whatever standards exist today, I would say that they are actually adding more friction to the growth and usage of Indian languages on the internet. Let me just say it in a few words.
Mm-hmm.
Although internet itself came to India in 1995, when India was already using a lot of local languages in digital medium. But Indian users did not have a lot of computers, computer penetration was poor. Internet came in 95, but the first devices that could actually support Indian languages on internet came at least 15 years later.
Mm-hmm.
At least 15 years later, Hindi, right? And because of this delay, there was no Indian user who could have used an Indian language on the internet. That is the reason why we also see that in spite of having so many users out of India, the Indian language content on the internet is so abysmally low, right? If you don't even have access, how would you create or post content? So, and India has got several languages. If the most popular Hindi came 15 years later, then what do we talk about other languages, right? So I would say we are fairly young in terms of our presence on the internet. Now, let me say that when in 95, India was already using native languages on the computers, versus why would it take so long for internet to have Indian languages? That is because these are based on two totally different standards. India created its own national standards for digital usage of languages way back in the 1980s, and which is what we were using. And the internet ended up creating a separate set of standards, which we call as Unicode, OpenType, etc., which are still very ambiguous. So the initial growth and usage of Indian languages in the digital medium, which was happening rapidly, we could not see that same kind of rapid growth of Indian languages on internet, even when these started getting available on the devices for end users. So the same rate of growth did not appear. And why it did not appear? Like today, you and I, we would still agree that using Indian languages on the internet is more difficult than using English.
Right.
So, right, we are saying that why? Because the new standards are actually more complex, they are ambiguous, and they create noise. When they create noise on text, we are talking about machine learning. Machine learning uses data. And all the data that people are creating in English are well facilitated and following proper unambiguous standards. Whereas when it comes to Indian languages, if these are ambiguous, noisy text, then all of these machine learning and analytics tools, algorithms, they fail. They do not work as efficiently, which is another very big reason why we don't see Indian language tools coming up that easily. And it is unlikely to happen. It is we will continue to suffer with poorer tools as long as these standards are not fixed.